are any questions as we go through, you can put them in the chat box or the Q&A, and we will all work on answering those as we go along. Today, we're just going to be really focusing on the integration with Neptune and Attune, but also talking about some of the current events going on in flood insurance. Some of you may have been seeing in the news out west in Utah and in California, atmospheric rivers, melting snowpacks. Again, a different example of a flood risk that someone might see versus a hurricane out in the Gulf, which we do have a tropical storm actually starting to spin up already in April, which is surprising to see. But those are some of the few topics we're going to go through. Before we do that, I want to go ahead and introduce some people. I'll let them actually introduce themselves. We do have one person who's not listed on there. Brian, feel free to hop in and introduce yourself as well.
Alex, do you want to start or do you want me to kick it off?
I'll go ahead and start then. I'm the director of commercial lines over here at Neptune Flood. My name is Alex, and I oversee our distribution and sales for the commercial product.
Awesome. And my name is Shane Corcoran. I'm the carrier partnerships lead here at Attune. I've been with Attune for roughly 4.5 years now, and I oversee and manage all of our digitally distributed carrier partners. So Workers' Comp, Neptune Flood, Hiscox, GL, PL, our Coalition Cyber, that all kind of falls under my umbrella. So thank you all for attending.
Hey everyone, I'm Morgan. I've been with Attune for about 2.5 years now. I started in the customer care team, and I am now the content marketing manager. So if you get an email from a marketing email from Attune, that's me. Please don't unsubscribe. I take it very personally. But if you get any emails, if you see any YouTube videos, social media posts, that's from me. So appreciate you all being here, and I will pass it along to Brian.
Hi, everyone. My name is Brian Holst, and I work closely with Shane with our digital carrier partners, facilitating the relationship with our carriers and kind of the liaison with our care team as well, making sure everything is functioning properly with them as well.
I think Jean-Luc may have stepped away for 30 to 60 seconds, but he's our chief customer officer and oversees sales and services for all of Neptune. So our support team and all of our sales team as well. And he'll be back in a second and can help answer any questions anyone has as we move through this. Thank you everyone for introducing yourselves. We'll go ahead and move forward to an exciting topic. You may have seen one of those emails that went out that Morgan was talking about, and we are doing an April promo with Attune. The general idea is we will be paying out $50 per every new business bind, unlimited number of binds. So if you bind 5 policies, it's $50 times 5, but it just has to be bound between 4/1 and 4/30, 2023. It does also need to be signed and paid for, so it can't be something you bind 5 policies and you cancel them all at the end of April. They do need to be signed and paid for by 5/30. That's 30 days post-effective date of the final effective date that's eligible, which is why we chose that date. Lastly, personal, commercial, and RC BAP are eligible. Our partnership with Attune is primarily on the BOP side with small business, but you do have the ability to quote personal, RC BAP, which is for condo products, and also other types of buildings such as mixed use, hotels, apartments. And we'll kind of talk about that a little bit later on. Shane will kind of show you how that can be done in the system if you want to quote another product. And I can also show that as well on my end. Alrighty, well, before we talk a little bit about how to quote, I want to bring us back to one of the topics that aligns well with the icebreaker we talked about, which is types of flooding. There's so many different water sources out there, and it really depends on the area that you're in. For example, with the first one we see on the screen of coastal, surge flooding is the most common in the coastal areas. We've taken a look at an example like Hurricane Ian. All of a sudden you have a Category 4, Category 5 hurricane approaching the coastline, and it carries with it a lot of that water, and all of a sudden you have large losses for your clients. That's usually a longer time event. You have a lot of heads up that it's coming, but unfortunately, there's not much you can actually do about it versus some of the other flood events that we'll talk about. It's usually one of the more devastating in terms of total losses, just given that it usually is followed by a hurricane as well. There's also another type of flooding, fluvial, which is about river overflow. There's a few different examples all over the country with this. You have St. Louis, you have the Ohio River Valley, you have the Mississippi. Out in California, we're seeing that as well with the heavy rainfall. There's multiple reasons for river overflow, whether it be the heavy rainfall we talked about with the atmospheric rivers we're seeing in California, or as we see in Utah with the snow melt. They're having some record amount of snow. It's starting to melt in the spring, causing rivers to rise and start to overflow. A few other things that impact this are also duration and intensity. Taking a look at California for a second, just 3 straight months of atmospheric river after atmospheric river. Whenever you have that much rain falling over that long period of time, you're bound to get flooding. It's hard for river systems to handle that. But then also intensity as well. If you get all that rain in one day, you can definitely see some large flood events. The last bullet point there is the downstream effect. And the reason I have that on there, it brings us back to Hurricane Ian. Just because you may not be on the main river of an area, if your client and you notice is actually connected to a creek downriver or downstream, it's important to remember that the water does need to flow somewhere. And bringing us back to an example here, in Florida, when Hurricane Ian hit, a lot of people heard about Naples and Fort Myers and all the really bad surge flooding, but not a lot of people heard about the river flooding that occurred. A lot of rain fell on the Orlando area, which is more in-state if you've never been to that area of Florida. And all that rain ended up flowing down to the Everglades, so north to south. And it caused major flooding in Northport, which is about an hour south of my hometown. I know a lot of friends and family that were trapped in their homes well away from the ocean. And the rain didn't really necessarily fall there either. It hit a little bit north and went up. It dropped a bunch of rain up in the northern part of the state, and then it flowed all the way down in the river systems, about an 8-foot wall of water, and flooded our main highway system, flooded a lot of neighborhoods. People are paddling in kayaks because of that downstream effect. So just want to really highlight that, because as you start taking a look at this information and applying it to some of your own clients that you're working with, they may not be right on the main river, or the rain may be falling up north, but just understanding that it all does have effect as it flows downstream. The last type of flooding is pluvial or flash flooding. Once again, another great example is California. They seem to be having almost every single example here right now, but geography really plays a big part of this. When it's flat surfaces, less likely to see a lot of flash flooding versus mountainous surfaces where all of a sudden it's starting from a higher elevation. You're getting a lot of rain up in the mountains, it flows downhill, and you get mudslides, you get mud flows, and also flash flooding. As well, drought also plays a big part of that. In Florida, when Hurricane Ian hit, I was watching the rainfall, but the ground would soak it up very quickly. Now you take an area like California, where they haven't had rain a lot over the past 5 years, and then all of a sudden you give them events like this, they may not be able to, the ground won't be able to hold as much water. So even just a little bit of water can all of a sudden sit on that surface and result in a flash flood. So while a lot of people think, during the past 5 years, I've heard from agents and clients saying we're more worried about wildfires. We're more worried about drought at the moment. Just know that it is a cycle. It does lead into one another. If you're having really bad drought, that does mean when that rain finally does come, the ecological system won't be able to handle that as well. Do we have any questions in the chat bot? Okay, I see one in here. Yep. Are these products available in Kentucky yet? And as we see, not yet in Kentucky. We are hoping to be moved into Kentucky by the end of Q3. We were hoping for Q1 of this year, but it got pushed out a little bit further, but it should be coming soon. So all that information I just gave you, I know is a lot, but it all kind of ties into this next slide, which is know your area. As we were mentioning, each area may have a lakes, maybe the common feature of your state, or rivers or oceans, but really getting an understanding of your area is very important, because each building in each region, each state has its own risks. One of the most common things with flood insurance when I'm talking to agents and having these conversations, I hear them tell me that they offer it to their clients and they say, no, it hasn't flooded here in 20 years. There's no point in me buying flood insurance, or the very common saying, it'll never happen to me. Unfortunately, the timelines and the memory spans of a lot of people are very short. I was just out in Houston at the IIAH conference, one of the bigger conferences in Houston. I was talking to an agent. He told me that people are starting to forget Harvey out there, which is only 2017, so about 6 years ago, and people are starting to forego flood insurance. So even on a 6-year scale, an event like Harvey, which had devastating impacts, people are already starting to forget. So that's one reason I always tell agents it's very important for you to be the historian for your clients, because your clients will forget. They will not remember the events there, or you'll have people moving down from another state like we see in Florida, and they're not really familiar with hurricanes or flooding. They may have heard about it on the news, but really being a historian of your area will really help you sell flood insurance a little bit better, as you'll have an understanding of the type of events that can occur to your clients. And if you can't explain that to them and provide a visualization or provide a story of an example, it can be difficult to convince them that it is something that they may need. But one interesting statistic, in the past 365 days, every single state has had a flood event. So it's not just a Florida thing. It's not just a Louisiana or Texas issue. It is a nationwide issue. Certain states may get it harder at one point, such as California, Utah, and Oregon right now, but every state generally has a flood event throughout the year there. So back to the bullet points themselves, each area has its own risks. We talked about coastal states, understanding surge risk. When you have an account like that, it's generally a little bit easier. They can visualize it a little bit better when they can see that ocean and they see all over the news, the hurricane events and all the situations that may occur. But also up in the mountains, definitely talking about the river flooding risk, talking about those creeks that are present for your clients, really making sure you examine that area. We're always happy to provide a map when we run a quote, and I'll show you that here in a second, and you can kind of get a view of the topography. Some of the questions that I recommend asking when quoting for your client is, what's the nearest source of water? Okay, I see a very small creek in the backyard, but is it connected to a larger creek? Because as we talked about that downstream effect, it may be a trickle of water right now, but when a big rain event comes, it can raise 4, 5, 6 feet and actually become a pretty serious threat. We talked a little bit about the short memory, and one line I really like is, history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. So just because they got through Harvey or Sandy or Ian unscathed, doesn't mean the next event is going to be identical to that. We heard that on the news actually down in Naples when Hurricane Ian came through. It was very similar to the prior storm a few years ago that came through. I believe it's Hurricane Ida. But it took a slightly different path. It almost mirrored it, but slightly different. And that small difference caused massive damage for Naples. The people down there weren't expecting it. They thought it was gonna be a very similar path and they'd all be fine. But even a few degrees difference in the trajectory caused massive surge flooding for those down in Naples. So just because someone did fine in a previous flood event doesn't mean the next one is gonna be the same. So before we go in and talk about one topic I really want to talk about is atmospheric rivers, which is what's occurring right now in California. I do want to kind of talk about some weather pattern events that I think are quite interesting in understanding why certain events are occurring right now out in California. You may have heard of El Nino and La Nina. They're really just weather system patterns. El Nino is when the water is warmer down in South America and cooler out in the Pacific by the continent of Asia. Different water patterns cause different jet stream effects. So we can see here at the top with El Nino, when the water is warmer down in South America, it causes the jet stream to go lower, which causes a much wetter winter in the Southwest and the Southeast. With La Nina, which is actually what has been occurring for from 2020 to 2023 to what we've been having lately, all of a sudden we get cold water in South America and warm water out in the Pacific, which causes a higher jet stream and wetter winters in the Pacific Northwest and wetter in the Ohio Valley region. I can attest to the drier weather. We haven't had much rain in Florida, and you can kind of get an idea of that wetter region in Northern California causing all of that rain that we're seeing now. If I actually zoom out of my PowerPoint, I want to pull something up for you real quick that I think is pretty interesting. The years of La Nina. You can see I pulled in this information on when we've had La Nina. You can see it's relatively spread out over the years, but as we get into the 2000s, we've been in a La Nina pretty much every year since around 2005. We had a short gap a few years, but for about past 20 or 15 years per se, we've been in La Nina, which means we've been getting these wetter winters up in California or in the Washington area and in the Ohio River Valley. We're starting to transition back into an El Nino phase. But understanding this, and the reason I'm bringing it up, it helps you understand your region. So when you're in a certain area like this, and you know it's a La Nina winter, it may better explain why you're seeing that rain in your area or why you're not seeing that rain in your area. And all this is kind of tied together and then now ties into these atmospheric rivers. And if I bring up that big slide again, we can see some of the information here. California has had about 20 atmospheric rivers over the past 3 months. And these atmospheric rivers carry water vapor from tropical regions. So they're going ahead and taking that warm water from the Pacific that we talked about, bringing that over. And as it goes over the mountains in California, that water vapor cools, causes a lot of rain to fall. And because it's in a very narrow pathway, a lot of intensity in that atmospheric river. And as you can see in this quote here, a strong atmospheric river transports an amount of water vapor roughly equivalent to 7.5 to 15 times the average flow of the water at the mouth of the Mississippi River. And that is what we're seeing over and over again. This rain keeps getting dumped on California. And as that flows down into Southern California, there's certain areas right now out in California that Corcoran, California, and Kings County, is the site of where a lake used to be, and it's starting to fill up again just from the consistent rainfall that we're seeing. So a lot of areas are under threat from flash flooding and from river flooding currently because of these atmospheric rivers. I really thought this was an interesting picture. I don't know how well you can see it here, but they're getting hit over and over again with these. Right now, we're writing a lot in California. If you have businesses out there, I definitely recommend helping them at least get a flood quote, see what it costs, see if that's something that makes sense to them. We've seen about a 600% increase in flood sales out in California and in Utah as well, because of the melting snowpack out there. So definitely, if you have any clients out there, I recommend going to Attune, running a quote, see if a flood quote would be a benefit to them. Alrighty, well, I'm gonna go ahead and pass it over to Shane. I talked a lot there. He's gonna go ahead and walk us through the system. So if you do have a flood quote you want to run, he can show you how you can do that in the Attune system and through Neptune.
Awesome. Thank you, Alex. And while I get this up, feel free to drop any questions into the portal or into the chat box here. All right. So I really just wanted to show how easy it is to get a quote if you have an exposure or if you have an insured that's interested. Hopefully you're all familiar with the login portal when you get to Attune. One of the things I like to point out, as sometimes it's easy to forget, is where are the guidelines to start? Maybe you don't have an insured yet, but you kind of want to understand what you would be selling. We have them located right here on the bottom right. So as soon as you log in, you'll get to the activity portion of the portal. They're here. They're also under the support tab. So say you're working on another account, you want to request an endorsement, but you also have flood top of mind. You're like, hey, what can I sell for flood? We also put them right here in the support tab. When it comes to actually doing a quote, you can get this done in minutes. It's very, very simple. What you need to do is you need to go in and create an account. So for this, I will do Shane Demo 4. I did a few tests before this. 205. Let's do one in Connecticut. Street Westport. Our portal is great because it will try to complete the address for you and make your life a little bit easier. Again, make it as seamless as possible. One thing to note here, we do ask for the billing or the mailing address, but I would recommend putting in the location address. If you're here just for flood on an account, we can always amend the mailing, the mailing address afterwards. It's very simple, and I'll show you how to do that. From here, we will ask for the classification. When it comes to flood, the specific classification is not overly needed, as the underwriting function comes from the location, and that would determine its exposure to a flood event. From here, you just scroll down and click Get a Quote. This will bring you to the Neptune portal, and it's really that simple. And what you will bring you to is the commercial version of the Neptune portal. So this is what it would look like once you click that in the Attune portal. Say you had, and what we're set up right now is, as Alex mentioned before, is we're really focused on the Main Street BOP and commercial, but that doesn't mean you can't quote a residential or an RC BAP. So say you have a location that is residential and you'd like to offer them a flood quote. All you need to do is click on the upper left-hand corner for a Neptune agency portal. It will bring you to this page here. And if we type in Westport, Connecticut again, it'll show the Google address right here. Click OK. This will give you an offering of everything that Neptune is able to write, or Neptune offers. So say this is a one home location, you would just click one home, and that would bring you to the residential offering. My computer's running a little slow, but as you can see, it's really that easy when it comes to our portal. Most of the information already pulls for you. And I believe, Alex, I think you already have it set up with what is pulled over. But one of the things to focus on is at the very bottom, it'll say, can you verify the mailing address? So if you put in the location address, that'll carry over to the mailing, and that's where you would just put in the new mailing address. And that prevents any difficulties with, hey, I actually put in the mailing, they have a PO box or something like that. And it causes some difficulties with the quote. And in that event, the easiest way to fix it is just go in, create a new account, and put in the location first. And then again, it'll be very seamless.
Shane, we have a question about accessing Neptune directly per se. Do you have the button that shows how they can go to the main page from the Attune portal?
Right. So unfortunately, we're having some tech issues at the moment. So when I click Get a Quote, we'll be receiving an error. But what it would normally look like in your normal flow is once you click Get a Quote, it will show some tips and tricks about flood and some great talking points when talking to the insured. But it'll also show two options of continue to quote or visit Neptune. And if you click Visit Neptune, it will bring you back to this home page right here, where you'll be able to access all of your previous accounts you've done, or start, say, a residential from scratch.
Thanks, Shane. Yeah, that's one of the easiest ways to get to that home page if you want to run another quote, if you want to see the portal, etc. We did have another question about obtaining a flood report. I assume you're meaning like a risk report per se. We don't provide flood reports. If you ever want to reach out to myself, I'm always happy to take a look at the risk with you. We do have some modeling we do behind the scenes. I can give you a little bit more insight into what we're seeing, but we don't run flood reports per se. So I'll go ahead and share my screen. Shane just went through and completed the quote process. I will take over from the Neptune side. And I do see another question here as well. Is the BI limit maxed at 25K, or can we select a higher dollar value? And we have a few more questions I'll answer as we go along. So we're now in the portal on the Neptune side. Here we have our quote number. Our quotes are valid for 60 days in the system. You can come back at any time and go ahead and access this by clicking on the button that Shane just mentioned. As well, down here, we do have our waiting period. You can see we have a 10-day wait to get flood insurance in place, unlike the 30-day wait with the NFIP. And this comes into effect and it really makes a difference. For example, out in Utah right now, we had a lot of agents call in. They said a lot of their clients didn't want to wait 30 days, so they weren't going to purchase flood insurance. We're selling them instead the flood because we have a 10-day waiting period, so we can get coverage into effect a bit quicker. We also allow them to waive the 10-day wait for two reasons, either for a loan transaction or for a renewal. So we're quite flexible in waiving that 10-day wait. So if you need it to be 4/14, we can do that for a renewal or a closing. At this point, I'll scroll down. We see we've already pre-filled a lot of information on the property, the year built, the square footage, the flood zone. If you have an elevation certificate, you're more than welcome to use one, but it's also not required with Neptune. At this point, we just answer a few more questions about construction type. It's wood frame. It's a 2-story building. I go ahead and I put the coverage amount that I'm looking for. We go all the way up to 4 million on the Neptune site. So I can go anywhere between 50,000 and 4 million. You see that rate update as I change this. So 500,000, maybe I want to do $1 million. I can go ahead and make that change and we'll see that rate update. At this point, I can select my deductible and then we get down to business interruption. We did have a question in the chat box about the BI coverage being at 25K. It still is at 25,000. We are working on increasing that to 100,000. It's one of the things that's on our list of improvements. We're also looking into getting replacement cost for the building as well. So a few things down in the pipeline that we're working on, but at the moment it is 25,000 for the BI coverage. We do have some more questions. I'll try to go ahead and answer them as we go through here. Tried to quote a single family home in California, got an error message. We are only having a moratorium in Kings County. All other counties, we should be open. Generally, that will be available on the homepage, and I'll go ahead and show you that. Another question, how did you come about with the proper flood zone, or did it automatically populate? We pulled the flood zone based on the red pin location. We're actually able to take a look at the property and the outline of the structure, and we pull in the flood zone based on that. So, and we pull in year built and square footage based on other data sources as well. A few more questions. Are you doing residential risks in Utah? Yes, we are. Right now, I think it's our #2 state over the past 2 weeks. So we're writing a lot of flood in Utah at the moment. All righty. Does your building coverage include coverage for foundations? Yes, building coverage does include coverage for foundations. I think I caught up on all the questions. So we got our final rate, 1763 for $1 million in building coverage in an AE zone in Westport, Connecticut. At this point, I just need to go ahead and enter in my name insured. Maybe it's ABC LLC, the primary contact, or my named insured. This is my email and phone number. If you ever want to reach out to me after this, I'm more than happy to take a look at your quote or help you in the system. Go ahead and we can update our mailing address. We can add a lien holder. And then we get down to the final part where we would go ahead and be able to view our quote, bind, or send a rejection email. We do have some more questions coming through. I'll go ahead and answer those before we bind. Are you writing in an AE zone in Miami? Yes, we are writing in AE zones, all flood zones in Miami. It really depends on the property though. Sometimes you may get a rejection. Maybe it's too risky. Maybe the elevation's too low. But the majority of the time we are saying yes. And we are writing a lot in Miami. Does flood coverage cover driveways? No, flood coverage is only going to be covering the buildings and the contents within such buildings. What happens if we have a zone determination that is different than what you have? X versus AE, will it impact price? So if you have a different flood zone determination, you can reach out to us. We do allow you to raise the flood zone. As you can see, I'm allowed to go below and lower the flood zone. You would need to reach out to us if you want us to lower it, and we can take a look at that documentation, and that's perfectly fine. Sometimes banks may have different opinions on the flood zone. Sometimes it updates really quickly, and you have the most up-to-date information. We're more than happy to take a look at that. Since everyone is using longitude and latitude now, does flood zone really matter? Not really. The only reason we're still using flood zones is because banks require flood zones to determine whether or not a homeowner or a business owner requires flood insurance. Ultimately, flood zone makes up a very small part of the rate. We're mainly looking at that lat long and running models on that. I see some more questions coming through. I'm on pause for now. I'm going to go through the bind process, and I'll try to go ahead and answer them as we get to the end here. But let's go ahead and pull up our quote. We'll see a PDF copy that will generate with your agency information will be at the bottom here. Breakdown of coverage and premium. Then we have that wording stating we meet all the mandatory requirements for private flood, basically stating banks are required to accept our flood coverage. And we have this on our quotes, our deck pages, and our policies. Say you go ahead and offer that to the client, and they say they do not want to bind. Well, we actually have a flood rejection button now. We just added about 2 months ago. So if you want to go ahead and protect your E&O, we built this into the system. We'll actually send out an email to the email you put down. It'll include a form that they can go ahead and sign, showing that you did offer flood coverage to your client, and that they did reject that. So if there is a flood event, for example, in Hurricane Harvey, 70% of the flood claims were in flood zone X. A lot of agents were having E&O issues because they were never offered flood to the client, or the client was saying that they never offered it, but they didn't have any such proof. So we actually built this into the system for you to help protect your E&O, but it's also a sales tool as well. When we send out this rejection email, it does include a buy button. So they do have the ability to change their mind and purchase that policy directly through the email. So definitely a great tool to be taking advantage of from a compliance perspective and from a sales perspective. About 40% of our policies as well are in X zone. X zones are those non-mandatory flood zones. 40% of our policies are in those zones. So a lot of agents are having success selling that. In the past, it may not have been feasible to offer it in X zones because you don't want to waste 30 minutes offering it just to get a no. But because by going through Attune, you're able to add on a flood quote to every BOP that you run, it really cuts down that time process and makes it much more efficient. And Attune's done a really good job of integrating our product in there so that you can easily start offering other products that you may not have otherwise offered. Attune's our #1 commercial partner for that reason, because they make it easy on agents to take care of the BOP while also offering that flood. So like I said, 40% of our policies are in flood zone X, that non-mandatory zone. So definitely consider offering it in those zones. You will see some success there. And hopefully, it doesn't take you too much time so you can move on to the next one. Say they want to go ahead and bind, though, we can go ahead, press the bind button. This will pop up an application for you as the agent to sign. You'll be able to go ahead and sign the first part of the document. Once you sign the application, it will take you to a payment page. Right off the bat, you have the ability to pay by ACH, credit card, or by check. You can skip over this, though. Payment's not due at the time of bind. It's due by the effective date. So you don't need to make payment right now to get all your documents. If we go ahead and click view policy like I just did, bring you into the policy management page where we can see a breakdown of the building. Scrolling down a bit further, we have a copy of our invoice immediately available to us. Down a bit further, we have the complete policy jacket, all 39 pages available to you. Copies of the deck page, copies of the application, and you can also add documents here. Down at the bottom, we do have a breakdown of coverage and premium. Then on the left-hand side, we can see the policy number. It's not been paid yet. It's not been signed by the insured, but the agent has signed it. We also have the insured location, insured contact, and agency contact. We are direct bill, so we just sent out an email to the client, my email right here. That email will then allow them to sign and pay online. Once they sign and pay, we will get those green check marks and we'll be all set there. For any reason they did not receive that email, you can click on resend email link and send that email as many times as you need to. You're also more than welcome to print off the invoice and application and have them sign manually. So that's some background information on the policy management system. We do have some more questions still in the chat box, so I'll use this time to come through and answer these now. If you have questions, definitely please feel free to go ahead and put them in there, and we'll try to tackle them as we go along here. Do marinas qualify for flood coverage under your product? Yes, I've written a few marinas around the country, as long as they're not built over the water. So they would have to be. Some marinas have structures that are fully on land. That's fine. If it's built on a pier over the water, then that would not be qualified for flood coverage. What do you use to find the flood zone? We have multiple different data sources we use to find the flood zone. We have, I think, of 3 different sources that we're cross-referencing. It's services that we pay for and provide this information. Are all flood policies paid in full? Yes, we do require payment in full, either by ACH, credit card, or by check. And that's pretty much the same case with almost all flood companies. As mentioned, it's not due at the time of bind. It is due by the effective date. Very good questions. Thank you all for asking those. Thank you all for taking some time to learn a little bit more about the integration we have with Attune and the partnership we have with Attune. Happy to answer more questions at this time if you have some. We do have a little bit of time left over here. I also actually have one more, apologies for that. I have one more slide I forgot to mention, which I think really ties in well, which is how to sell. So we went through quoting, we went through the different types of flooding that can occur, but how do you actually sell that? We talked about this a little bit while quoting, but forget the mandatory versus non-mandatory, forget those flood zones. Flood zones only tell a small part of that story. Because Attune and Neptune make it so easy to offer, we highly recommend getting into a habit of offering it on a more consistent basis. BOPs do not cover flood, homeowner policies do not generally cover flooding. So really making sure you're offering that because it is the #1 disaster in the United States. As I mentioned earlier, in the past 365 days, there was a flood event in all 50 states. And that's just a short list of a few that come to mind, but there are many others, smaller ones that don't make the news, that aren't necessarily captured in the mind of the public that are happening all day around the world. The other thing I always tell people to talk to their clients about is playing that tape forward. When your client says no, they don't want flood insurance, really walk them through that situation of what happens if there is a flood event, or there are atmospheric river out in California. There's flash flooding in the mountains or in Arizona. There's river flooding in Ohio. There's a hurricane in Florida. What happens if you don't have flood insurance? #1, a lot of anxiety. I remember when Hurricane Ian was heading towards my hometown of St. Petersburg. Luckily, I had flood insurance, but even at that time, I had a lot of anxiety about what could happen. But at least having flood insurance was a major peace of mind for myself. But if they do not, do you have $90,000 to self-insure? That is the average flood claim for commercial businesses. And according to a report from FEMA, 40% of businesses do not reopen following a disaster. And a year after that, 25% more fail. So having flood insurance is so important to bouncing back after an event like that. Having that BI coverage that we talked about is just another added benefit as well. And then, like we mentioned in the beginning, creating that flow. Flood a new business renewal takes 2 minutes. Definitely try using our E&O tool, the rejection waiver, to make sure you're #1, protecting yourself, but also #2, making sure you get in that habit of offering it to your clients so they can be protected as well. That is my last slide. We do have a few more questions. I'll go ahead and answer them at this time. Thank you, Linda. Thank you, Christine. Mark, if a property sells during the term coverage, is there any premium refund? Yes, it is pro rata premium refund due. All we need is a closing statement. So you just go ahead and provide that closing statement to our support team. They would go ahead and cancel for the date of sale, and then there would be a premium refund. Thank you, Katie. The real issue for my state is basements. Renee, that's a very good point. So for commercial, very similar, our policy form mirrors the NFIP, and there's not much we can really do on the commercial side with that regard. But on the personal line side at the moment, we do have a basement contents coverage extension. So if you're quoting a home in your state, and a lot of people have basements, we do have a $10,000 coverage extension on the personal line side. It is something we're looking at for commercial, but right now it is only on the personal line side, but definitely a major selling point. The fact that you can extend that contents coverage down there. As I know, a lot of people put some money into their basements, and that's usually the first place to have issues. If the hazard is not issued through you, can we still send the rejection form through your system? Yeah, you're more than welcome to send a rejection form through our system to show that you offered it. Even if you bind it with another flood company or someone else, we just want to make sure people are protecting their E&O, and so more than welcome to do that. Thank you, Renee, for writing a policy with us last week. Hopefully you can write one again this month. I don't know if you saw the April promo, the $50. But definitely a great month to be writing policies as we head into hurricane season and just all the flooding occurring. I don't know if anyone saw, there's a tropical storm starting to form in the Gulf right now in April, which is so early for that to occur. But it's already starting now. So definitely take advantage of the promo during the month of April. Do you have anything that provides support for financial strength to be able to pay Neptune versus NFIP? I've had a few clients ask. So one thing that's really important is Neptune is actually not the carrier per se. We are an MGU. We are the managing general underwriter. We place the risks with multiple different capacity providers. So the financial strength you're actually asking about is Lloyd's. So we have 3 syndicates of Lloyd's that provide coverage, provide the policies for us. We have Indian Harbor, who's backed by AXA. We also have Transverse. All those are A- or better. If you want to send me an email, I can send you the AM Best documents. That's not really the most consumer friendly document, but I do have one other document that mentions who our carriers are. So maybe that will help you in those conversations about financial strength, but it's not necessarily Neptune. It's Lloyd's and Indian Harbor and Transverse, and Lloyd's is older than the United States itself. So if Lloyd's goes under it, I think we all have some bigger problems. At what point would you request to move the account due to losses, or do you? So we allow one loss less than 25,000. If it's more than 25,000 or more than one loss, we would non-renew the following year. So we wouldn't cancel midterm. If they had a loss, it would be the following year. If they had a $100,000 loss, then there'd be a non-renewal that would be issued. But it wouldn't be it wouldn't be midterm. I don't know if that answers your question, Daisy. Can I get that info? Yep, as Morgan mentioned, we'll make sure to provide that in a follow-up email. A lot of information here. Hopefully you're able to retain some of it, even if it's just one piece of information. A lot of information in this webinar. Happy to answer some more questions. We still have a little bit of time, but if not, I do want to thank you all for taking some time out of your day to learn a little bit more about Neptune's partnership with Attune.
Yeah, and in case with the extra time, folks like to go in and try a quote, we also have a chat function right in the Attune portal. So please feel free to reach out to our service team if you have any trouble, and we'd be happy to help you through your first quote or whatever quote you're working on. So that option is also there, as well as the Neptune team.
Thank you, Shane. I don't see any more questions coming through. Thank you, everybody, for your time. Looks like we'll go ahead and we'll end the webinar.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.